To solve problems involving percents, we can set up proportions and use them to solve for the unknown value. Whenever we're solving for percents, we use the same proportion, and that proportion will say part over whole equals percent over 100. In this proportion, this number will always be 100, but you may have to fill out part, whole, or percent, and one of them will always have a variable. Another way of looking at this is sometimes you will see part referred to as is, and you will see whole referred to as of. So sometimes you'll see is over of equals percent over 100. In this problem, it asks, what is 80% of 25? If I look at my proportion, it says part over whole equals percent over 100. So the first thing I want to do is just set up my percent or my proportion so I can figure out what goes where. I know that the number over here is always going to be 100, so I'm going to go ahead and place that where it belongs. Then I look at my problem. It says, what is 80%? Well, this is my percent, and I notice that my percent always goes above my 100, so I'm going to put 80 right here. And then it asks, what is 80% of 25? Well, in this case, because it's asking for 80% of 25, 25 is my whole. So 25 will go in my denominator on my first ratio. And what I don't know is the part of that whole, because I'm looking for what is 80% of that 25. And since 80% is here, I'm looking for what does that actually equal. Now to solve this, I solve like I solve any proportion. I know that these are basically equivalent fractions, so I know that to get from 25 to 100, I would multiply 25 times 4, and that would give me 100. Well, I know that that would mean I would multiply x times 4 to give me 80. But that doesn't really help me because I don't know what x equals. Well, in problems like this, I can also work backwards. If I know that I had to multiply 25 by 4 to get 100, then to get from 100 to 25, I would divide by 4, which means that to get from 80 to x, I would also divide by 4. When I do 80 divided by 4, I get 20. So in this case, x equals 20. This means that 20 is 80% of 25. Next, 7 is 35% of what number? I use my same proportion, which is part over whole equals percent over 100, so I need to fill in the values that I know. I know that this number is always 100, and then it says 7 is 35% of what number? Well, I know 35 is my percent, so that will go above my 100. And then it says 7 is 35%. If I know that 7 is equal to 35%, then 7 is going to go right here with 35%. 7 is going to be my part. What I'm looking for is what was the whole that 7 was a part of. Now, again, I solve like any proportion. I know that to get from 7 to 35, I would multiply by 5. But to get from 35 to 7, I would divide by 5. So to get from x to 100, I would multiply by 5, but since I don't know what x is, I'm going to have to go backwards. So I'm going to have to divide 100 by 5 to get x. When I do 100 divided by 5, I get x equals 20. That means that 7 is 35% of 20. So if I were to find 35% of 20, I would get 7. 12 is what percent of 40? Again, I'm using my proportion, part over whole equals percent over 100. So I fill in the values that I know. I know that this value is always 100. Well, when I look at my problem, it says 12 is what percent, which means I'm looking for my percent. And since I don't know the percent, I'm going to put a variable to represent it. Then I know I have 12 and 40. Well, if I look at 12, I know that 12 is part of 40, and 40 is the whole value that I have. Now I know that I need to go from 12 to x, so I need to figure out how I got from 40 to 100. Well, I know that I can't multiply 40 by a whole number to get 100, so to figure out what I multiplied 40 by, I can do 100 divided by 40, which gives me 2.5. That means that to get from 40 to 100, I actually multiplied by 2.5. Now to get from 12 to x, I'm also going to multiply by 2.5. When I do 12 times 2.5, I get that x equals 30. That means that 12 is 30% of 40. Next, I see that there are 10 boys and 15 girls in Miss Hunt's class. What percent of students are boys and what percent of students are girls? Well, let's start by finding what percent are boys. I know that I have to use my proportion, which says part over whole equals percent over 100. Well, the question is asking me for the percent, so that means for percent, I'm going to put an X because I don't know what the percent is. Now, the part here is going to be the number of boys. I know that there are 10 boys in Miss Hunt's class, and that's the part that I'm looking for. Then I need to know the whole. In this case, whole is going to be the total number of students in Miss Hunt's class. Now, it doesn't actually tell me how many students are in Miss Hunt's class, but I know that there are 10 boys and 15 girls. So to figure out the total number in her class, I would do 10 plus 15, which would give me 25. So that means the whole number of students in Miss Hunt's class is 25. So my proportion is 10 over 25 equals x over 100. To solve for x, I'm going to solve like normal. I know that to get from 25 to 100, I would multiply by 4. So to get from 10 to x, I would also multiply by 4. And 10 times 4 gives us 40. That means that 40% of students are boys. Now let's look at how many are girls. Again, I'm using my proportion of part over whole equals percent over 100. I want to know what percent of students are girls, and I know that there are 15 girls, so the part that is girls is 15. The whole is still 25 because there were 10 boys and 15 girls, which means there is a total student population of 25 in the class. What I don't know is the percent, so I'm going to leave that as x, and this number is always 100. Now, to get from 25 to 100, I know that I would multiply by 4. But in this case, I have to also multiply 15 times 4. When I do 15 times 4, I get x equals 60. This means that 60% of the students are girls. Finally, I know that there are 3,200 students enrolled at Duluth High School. 40% of these students have taken an art class as an elective. How many students have taken an art class? Again, I'm going to use my proportion of part over whole equals percent over 100. In this case, I know that there are 3,200 students enrolled at Duluth High School. That is the total number of students, which means that's going to be my whole number of students. So 3,200 represents 100% of the population. Then it says that 40% of these students have taken an art class. Well, percent goes up here, so I'm going to put 40% here. What I don't know is how many of those have taken, so I'm looking for the part that have taken an art class. Now to solve, I know that I need to get from 40 to x, which means I need to know how I got from 100 to 32. Well, to get from 100 to 30 or to 3,200, I know that I would multiply by 32 because 100 times 32 would give me 3,200. So to get from 40 to x, I would also multiply by 32. When I do 40 times 32, I get x equals 1,280. This means that 1,280 students have taken an art class.